How's it going, everyone? This is Steven Svoboda. We just got a awesome live Q&A. Just me. I'm Vernon Miggs, hosting today. Let's start off. How are you doing, Steven? How are you feeling right now?
I'm great. Good to be here with everybody. Sorry we can't all be in person in one physical room, but we're doing the next best thing.
Yep. And so I want to encourage everyone to go ahead and submit your questions, preferably through the Zoom Q&A, but I'll keep my eye out on the Huva Q&A as well. Mike Buchanan says, "Hi guys, huge fan of Steve S."
That's nice. Huge fan of you, Mike. We were just talking about that, how you ran that London conference like a tightest ship ever run.
Yep. All right, so I guess as a way to kind of break the ice, I suppose. What are your thoughts on those who protest the women's draft on the basis of concern for women, or that women cannot or should not fight in war?
It's a complex issue and it's an interesting one. And I see both sides of it. I mean, I see the side where on average, men are in fact more equipped to be soldiers than women are. And some feminists might bristle at me saying that, probably would, but just the truth. But at the same time, there are men who are not good soldiers and there are women who do a pretty decent job. And that was in the brief that, as we'll get into later, the ACLU Women's Rights Project submitted on behalf of NCFM in the Supreme Court case that I'm talking about now. And I'll tell you, I'm one of them that wouldn't have been a very good soldier. And I knew that about myself when I was this naive 18-year-old, but born in February 1960. So I was required to register for the draft. So that's why I never did register. And there's a story in that I also got into in the video, I know.
Ken Jolivet says, "Hey, Stephen, great brief, but very sad results. Lessons learned. Never cuddle the snake, the ACLU."
Right. Well, they did a good job as our lawyers. There was an unfortunate coda to it, but this whole thing about bringing in these issues that were completely unrelated to what our case was about. But they did a very good job as our lawyers, and honestly, like, it was probably advantageous to have a group that was about women's rights as our lawyers. So then women's rights and men's rights were joining together, and we were optimistic the case would be accepted, and disappointed that it wasn't. Our friend Kavanaugh, unfortunately, decided not to be our friend.
Mr. 0303 asks, "Well, thank you, Stephen, for all your hard work for men. I was kind of curious about your family name. It means freedom in several Slavic languages. Do you know the origin of it?"
Oh, I'm well aware of that. And proud of it. And I've done a lot of human rights work. I used to do human rights work in Guatemala, grassroots human rights work. And I was actually risking my life when I was doing that. But freedom is an important thing to me. And I've always prided myself on trying to do that. Ironically, one of my sisters-in-law, actually, her last name is Freedom in English. That's quite a coincidence. So I'm half Slovak. My dad's side was pure Slovak. And it's just a name in Slovakia. I was actually there, and there was a truck going by that said Svoboda on it, and I took an old school photo with an analog camera, and it came out perfectly. It's amazing. I still have that picture, but anyway.
Well, I'd like to see that picture at some point.
Yeah.
You still have it.
Yeah. Yeah. The miracle of analog activity. You don't need a cell phone for everything, folks. Everybody knows that. I'm just kidding.
All right. Okay. Tom Caulfield asks, well, more like he says, "My thoughts about the draft are: 1, women must be added, emphasis on must, or 2, men must be removed. I don't care which one happens, but one must happen."
Well, that was exactly the position that the brief that the ACLU wrote for NCFM that we approved. That was exactly the position. It's gender discrimination. I mean, obviously it's gender discrimination. In fact, pretty much the only example of explicit gender discrimination still on the books. And we argued it has to change either one way or the other. And we claimed not to care. Now, look, NCFM doesn't take an official position on this one way or the other. But a lot of people definitely have preferences. And now, as I said in a coda to my video, there's a movement to get it passed into law that women are also going to be registering for the draft. So that's an interesting development. And the military, one of our best amicus briefs, declared, as I said, that women are part of the military, like it or not. The military's decided that. And who are we to argue with the military's considered judgment? And I thought that was a great, brilliant argument. I'm not more qualified than some general to say who should be in the military, and I'm not going to say that I am. And so I just, that's all we needed to say.
Mr. 0303 has another question. Speaking of our frenemy Kavanaugh, do you think the hashtag #MeToo witch hunt against him might be to break him before the men's draft question came before him?
That's what the thought is, that quite likely it was a little end run by him to try to get away from to try to get more favor or less disfavor with feminists. Nobody knows. I mean, he didn't give us a frank report card where he spelled out his strategy, but that's the guess. It was disappointing. I mean, look, you need 4 justices to grant certiorari out of 9. I mean, come on, it's explicit gender discrimination. There was a Supreme Court case that needs to be overturned. It's not rocket science. We felt like, you got to give us this. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that was the other tragedy about it, was people felt that if Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in addition to the tragedy of her dying, but if she had been around, we might have gotten certiorari approved and gotten the case. We felt like if we got approved, we were almost certainly going to win the case. So it really was unfortunate the way it played out.
Let's see. Grant Wilson asks, where can I find the now position online, NOW position online?
We can make that available after the conference. It's not that hard to find. You're referring to the amicus brief that the Now Foundation wrote in our case, one of the 3 friend of the court briefs. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I think that was what it was referring to.
Yeah, we should, let's work, Vernon or whoever I need to work with from ICMI. We can make those available without a problem. They're out there. They're public information. I mean, all that Supreme Court filings are publicly available.
Okay. Dean Hedges asks, is it possible to just have the gendered penalties removed? My worry is that women drafted will just get pregnant to avoid service.
To have the gender, have the gender penalties removed?
The gendered penalties removed.
I'm not sure what that means.
Dean, feel free to clarify your position. I think what he's trying to say is, in light of the second part of it, I think, I think he's talking about, women, getting pregnant to, for express purpose of, being in the service, but to avoid the service, I think.
It seems pretty clear that's been happening. I mean, if you look at pregnancy rates in the services, very strong circumstantial evidence that has in fact been happening repeatedly. Now, no one can say in any individual case with 100% certainty unless you have something signed from the person, but the numbers just, it's just, there's no way it's happening randomly.
Yeah, he did clarify that from not signing up for selective service. So,
right.
Okay. Robert Samurai asks, will you try again now, given that the awaited legislation did not put this issue through?
Well, we've filed our petition and it was disapproved. So I don't think there's going to be the possibility of trying again. Unfortunately, I wish there were. That was, we were trying to overturn the federal circuit court's decision, which in turn overturned the district court's decision, which was favorable to our position. So, unfortunately, no. But I do think that the tide of public thought about these issues is changing. Women and feminists obviously still have a lot of power. But something like this is such a cut and dried issue, and it's easier for people to sort of see it objectively, I think, than a lot of things. And I don't see how anyone could not see that it's gender discrimination to say that males have to do something females don't have to do. Isn't that the definition of gender discrimination? So, we've got a list here of 25 men's and boys issues, and that's only one of them. But I think we need to chip away at these things and make progress on whatever we can make progress on.
Mike Buchanan asked, Stephen, would you agree that having women fight, he has in quotation marks, fight, on the front line is a recipe for endangering the lives of both of them and the real soldiers, i.e. men?
From what I know, and I've read a few books on this topic. I'm certainly not an expert on this topic, but from what I know and from what I know about the men and women I've known in my life and spoken to, and the numerous service people I've known, I hear where you're coming from, Mike, but I don't think it's 100%, 0% thing. I don't think it's really arguable that there are women that have succeeded in the military. I mean, that was in our amicus brief. That's been documented repeatedly by the military. And look, I'll be honest with you. I think they exaggerate a little bit. I mean, I think if you were a lawyer and your job was to show that women have been successful and awesome in the military, the briefs that are written, that brief is sort of like what the lawyer would write. Maybe it is the brief the lawyer would write. I think they've definitely put things in the best light for women being viable members of the military, but I don't think you can really argue that no woman's been a viable member of the military. I think that ship has sailed. You can argue about numbers, and there's no way you're going to convince me that I could go off to war and survive more than 24 or 48 hours on a field. It's just not my skill set. I'm good at other things. I'd be terrible at it. And I know myself well enough to know that, which is again, why I never registered for the draft, despite, as I said in the video, all those semesters where I needed financial aid that is dependent on having said you've registered. So certainly the average man is going to be a better soldier than the average woman, but there's a lot of you can't use that. I don't think you can really use that reasoning. There's things women are better at on average. There's things men are better at on average. We don't want to go back to the days of saying, okay, well then, no men can dance, no men can cook, no women can be engineers. I mean, I don't think anybody really wants to go back to those days. At least not many people.
One thing I want to add to that is that some arguments I've heard that, that don't bar women from military service, like in general, is that technology for military is a bit better and more operable for both sexes. So I thought that was a more interesting, more compelling kind of an argument for that.
That's really true. I mean, and we had that in our brief too. I mean, the battlefield has really changed these days in a very profound way. I mean, the use of drones, and I forget the number now, but is it 1 in 5 soldiers actually see action as the word is used in the old meaning of the word, 1 in 5 or 1 in 10. It's a small number. I forget what the exact number is, but a lot of military members are not physically risking themselves in any realistic sense of what the word used to mean with regard to military activities. Thanks for reminding me of that. That's a very good point. And that is a point that we made in the briefs. I mean, amicus briefs are written by the people, by the entities that they're from. In other words, the Now Foundation's amicus brief. There were other signatories to it too, but the Now Foundation was the most prominent signatory. They have separate lawyers that do write their amicus briefs, but then, as you might imagine, they get reviewed by our lawyers, which was the ACLU Women's Rights Project, and by me and by the two others working with me for NCFM. And any of us can go back to the lawyers, and we did. It was several rounds of revision until we got something we all felt comfortable with. I just, by the way, those briefs, I know I'm repeating myself somewhat from the video, but those 3 briefs were just so great. I mean, we had 3 completely different entities. We had generals from the military, we had females associated with military, and these different groups and groups associated with underprivileged groups in the military. And all these groups were saying, with different angles, showing different rays of light on the issue, that male-only conscription needed to stop. And one interesting argument that you might not think of right off the bat is that it perpetuates stereotypes of both men and women. It perpetuates ideas men have to go out and be strong and be tough and be John Wayne and kill those people, whoever they are, that are against the U.S. and women
man up and die. Yeah,
women have to be all delicate and be at home making dinner. Oh, honey, did you kill the bad people? Oh, that's so good. Here's your steaming hot food. And oh, I could never do that, honey. And look, I mean, those stereotypes aren't, it's not true that there are no differences between men and women, for sure. And I would never argue that there are. At the same time, it's a spectrum of what people can do. And there are decorated soldiers who are females. I mean, many. It's thank goodness. I mean, we need all the people that can help us, both men and women, to defend this country. And not that I have necessarily supported every single thing the U.S. has ever done militarily, but that's irrelevant. I mean, if we're going to have an armed forces, we need a competent armed forces by definition. But yes, the battlefield has really changed in a profound way, and it's going to continue changing. So thanks for reminding us of that.
Well, Grant Wilson has another question that kind of falls along the same lines. Warfare is going artificial intelligence. Can the changed nature a few years from now be a material change in circumstances in order to bring on the same issue?
Well, it will be. It is, and it will be. And that's only going to continue to change. I mean, one of the things people talk about with women in the military is, and again, like, you know, first of all, like, obviously not everyone's heterosexual, though, again, obviously most people are statistically. But people talk about rapport and, you know, the effect on work, you know, armed forces, when you've got these sexual undercurrents that are going to certainly be more prevalent if you've got both men and women fighting. And I can't argue with that. I mean, and I get the point, and I'm sure that's not great for the military. And I'm sure it's something the military has to contend with every day. And it really is a negative force, I'm sure. But what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to try to get women out of the military now and have an all-male military again? That's not going to happen. That's never, ever, ever going to happen realistically. So what we have is a situation where we've got a military that's proven itself to work with both men and women, and however that happens. And yeah, I find it annoying that, like, they've relaxed some of the physical standards and said, oh, well, we need somebody to be able to carry 150 pounds, but okay, we'll make it 100 or make it 80, whatever it is. I mean, that stuff should not be happening. And that watering down our requirements should absolutely not be happening. But are there women that can match these standards? There certainly are. And I think that's been shown.
Angela asks, do you believe in esprit de corps and true morale? Did I pronounce that right? Esprit de corps?
You did.
Okay, yeah. The military readiness is more than being able to fire a gun, drive a tank, etc. It's how the whole team works. If the men are worried about having women on the battlefield for reasons of being captured and tortured and raped and having to see this, being slowed down due to difference in speed, strength, and capability. I think that's the gist of the question, actually.
Right. We were sort of talking about that earlier. I mean, I was more focusing on the potential for attraction between the men and women. But yeah, that's another side of it. And that's something people have talked about. And the answer is sort of the same, that yes, I mean, that those are all issues. And I'm glad I'm not in the military. I'd have to be having to deal with those while simultaneously maintaining a strong, powerful force able to do what we needed to do. I'm sure that's a very difficult thing, and political correctness, putting limits on what you can do. I do not envy anyone near the top of the military hierarchy having to do that, believe me. And like it or not, and some people don't like it, and this is the world we live in. So what are we going to do about it? I mean, it's 2021. Look, I mean, I don't want to get a field on the topic of this Q&A, but there are battles we can fight and battles we are fighting, and that's what this ICMI conference is all about. You'll hear from many different people who are fighting different battles very effectively, and we're doing that. But I suggest we fight the battles that we have at least a 1% chance of winning. That's my thought. So, yeah.
Right, yeah. All right, so Philip Tanzer says, he does have a question. From my own experience, I would argue that the military works better if women are excluded, so I would oppose military draft for all. But I would create a draft for all to serve the country in times of need. Not all men are suitable for military either. Would there be a possibility for a future draft that is not restricted to military service? And he also adds clarification. I'm not saying women can't be good soldiers, but it dramatically complicates the workplace in the military.
Oh, I don't doubt that it does dramatically complicate the workplace. It sounds like maybe this is a veteran asking this question. And if so, thank you very much for your service. I think that's a fantastic idea, and that's been talked about, and that would have given me an out when I had to go through this torturous path that I described about lining out that card for 25 academic periods. It's unbelievable. I'd never get away with it today with computers. That would be great. That would be fantastic. And that would have eliminated the problem for many of us, including for me, and perhaps also for my former roommate who was actually arrested for a couple of years. I may have mentioned Mark Larilla, one of the sort of 25 public protesters of the draft. And they might want to ask for some sort of proof, sort of analogous to what you have to do when you're a conscientious objector, some sort of proof that you in some way have a personality appropriate to be channeled into that. And they could ask for that, and anybody sincere about it could presumably produce that. And not that I'm encouraging that, but that would be fantastic if they did that. Other countries have something like that, right? I mean, why not the US?
Sean G asks, isn't it crazy that on one hand, unwilling men are conscripted to fight, and on the other hand, men are castigated for our supposedly innate tendencies to violence?
Right. Very good point. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough road being a man these days, being male these days. Can't be too sensitive, can't be too insensitive. Women need safe places. What about guys? Oh, guys don't need safe places. Why would we need safe places? We're guys, we're tough. Oh, right, but we can't be too tough. Oh, no. What do I do today? Like, how is it 64% tough is okay, but 65 isn't? Not easy navigating all this. You are completely correct. My goodness.
I agree. That is a good question. Yeah. Right. Mr. 0303 has another one. What would be the procedure to challenge the male-only draft issue now? From what I recall, some judges have declared it unconstitutional. Can that be used?
To challenge the male-only draft now? Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'd have to think about it. I don't think I can come up with an answer now. So I'm thinking we need to go on about we've got a federal law saying that there is a military draft, and apparently there's some legislative initiatives to change that to a male and female draft. But until that's done, it's a male-only draft, and that's unconstitutional. But we've just had an attempt to correct that, not be accepted by the Supreme Court. We're not going to get another federal appellate court case that we're going to be able to seek certiorari on anytime soon on this issue, presumably. So that's a tough question. I have to think about that offline. I can't really come up with a solution for that now. I think legislative approaches are probably the most likely to be successful, and they're already on their way. So that's great.
Grant Wilson has another question. What about equality of outcome with military personnel numbers, more or less representative of the population? Mandatory 50% female military, even if a draft is needed?
Interesting. Well, I don't know what the basis for that would be. To me, like, on the one hand, having freedom as my last name, which, isn't exactly the same as justice, but sort of being justice minded, the fairness of it appeals to me. But on the other hand, how do we get there? And then what do we do about all the other things in which we don't have equal male and female representation, namely everything? And I'm not really a fan of all this social engineering. There aren't enough women in STEM. Let's put PSAs, public service announcements, that are really stupid, and have public dollars pay for them. And I mean, even Neil Linden published this book last year called Epiphanies that I had a chapter in, about how I first got awoken to all these issues. And several of the women who contributed to that were saying, and these are like women in their 20s. It's not like women who are even in their early 30s. It's not women who are like 18. And they're like, dude, I never had any discrimination. I never had anybody tell me I couldn't do anything. Like, what is all this chatter going on about? You can do anything. You can be anything you want to be. You strong woman, you go. Like, that's all great. But why aren't you saying to me, don't be a chipmunk. Don't be 5 inches tall. Don't live on the moon. Like, I'm not going to live on the moon. I'm not going to be 5 inches tall. You don't need to tell me that. Don't eat rocks. I'm not going to eat rocks. Like, why don't we stick to stuff that's relevant? Like, feminism is so outdated. Like, Gloria Steinem, like, seriously, No interest whatsoever. I'm interested in the real world. Call me crazy. I'm interested in reality. I mean, that's where people are coming from now. And I mean, I'm 61 years old myself, but I can relate. I can relate. I do have some younger friends, and it makes sense to me. So,
well, since you brought up the moon, I wish the feminists would go there.
yeah.
All right. So, one thing I want to kind of add to the whole to this is that I see this this fight regarding the female draft is more of like a Solomon-esque sort of thing, you know, like it's more like a thought entertainment. You know, kind of like to cut the baby in half, to give a piece to each woman, kind of thing. But
right, and then the real mom will say, no, the other woman can have my baby, and
right,
yeah, discover who the mother is that way. Yeah,
sure, right. Because you know, in keeping to the whole freedom idea, like I oppose the draft entirely, personally. You know, but I think this is, you know, in principle, I don't like the idea of citizens just being constricted, because that's, you know. And I think the fight for freedom should be a completely voluntary affair, I think. And you know, I think more encouraged and, you know, made something that you can take more control of in your own right. Because I remember hearing some kind of some quotes from enemies during war that, you know, America has, you know, guns in every corner, every blade of grass. I don't even remember the exact quote of that whole thing was, but the idea is that we are our own homeland security. In principle, it's probably not that way anymore, I think, but you kind of get what I mean.
Oh, I get what you mean. Yeah, no, I mean, I personally agree. I don't like being told that either. It seems outmoded to an extent, and especially since we have a volunteer, so-called volunteer army now. And I say so-called because some people talk about economic conscription, where people don't have alternatives, and so they're sort of end up more or less forced to follow that route. I mean, nobody's really truly forced, but look, I mean, as a realistic matter, people's options vary depending on a whole bunch of factors. And I used to be a lawyer for poor people, a poverty lawyer. I mean, that was what I did the first few years of my legal career. And these people were my clients, and like they'd get up in the morning and they literally didn't know if they were having dinner that evening. So this is the way some people's lives are, and other people have more options, and other people still have more options, and it really varies. And people forget this, but yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it really grates the wrong way to me. And I mean, I guess if you really take it to another level, even a military draft where you have the option of volunteer service for a nonprofit or whatever it is, even that is not ideal, because you're still forcing people to take a year or 2 years, whatever it is, out of their lives. But to me, that feels a lot more acceptable. But I agree with you conceptually. Like, I don't like it, and we live in a country that's free, and I feel like this is a relic from like World War II, and we never really transcended it. Maybe we are going to at some point now that this discussion about women being in the draft is happening, but I feel like it's a relic from our past.
And everyone, please keep on getting these questions in. There have been some great questions today. And speak of the devil, there is a question right now from Ken Zolderbeck. I totally believe that women should serve their country, but I'm worried that having women drafted into all roles into the military will weaken it infinitely. A military must fight and win wars for their country. Generals have been bought, feminized, and some are woke, and they must obey their leaders, Secretary of Defense, and President. How do you really see things working if we get equality and women drafted with men?
I mean, it's a very tricky thing, and there's just, I feel like there hasn't been a discussion. I feel like there hasn't been a discussion about what I'm about to say, and I feel like people are sort of afraid to say it. But look, I have a master's degree in physics. I can't help myself. I'm very logically minded, and at least I try to be. And there's just a part of me that's incredulous. Like, okay, so how many requirements are we going to be adding here? And I don't necessarily disagree with any of it. I mean, maybe I disagree with the more extreme forms of so-called wokeness but look, I mean, hopefully not too many people will disagree that like slavery was a bad thing, and that there were probably consequences that flowed from that maybe affect some Black people even today. Like, that doesn't seem like a crazy hypothesis to me. I certainly believe that myself, and I believe that there's other ways in which other demographic groups have been had prejudice and been oppressed. I don't like that word particularly, but that's the word that comes to mind. And white people, men, whatever, all groups have been oppressed in different ways. And that's the unpopular thing to say. But the thing that people don't really think about, I feel like, is all this stuff exacts a cost. Every time you have a new concern, and all the concerns in themselves may be fine, probably are fine. It's good to be concerned about all the issues that so-called woke people are concerned about. But at the end of the day, it all adds to the bill. And this is what's going on in the military. I don't know how they do it. I literally don't know how they do it. I mean, these generals get up in the morning and they have to worry about female soldiers claiming that they were discriminated against somehow, claiming there was sexual harassment. It was supposed to be tough, right? I mean, their soldiers are supposed to go out there and be on a level with men. And we're told that a lot of them are on that level. And I believe that. But then they should have the same level of toughness in terms of their response to being roused or whatever. And I also believe that a lot of them do. Maybe most of them do. Maybe the great majority of them do. But a few of them don't. And that's where the problem comes in, because a few of those, and look, if you're a general, male or female, you can't have word going on that you're not being sensitive to gender. You got to be sensitive to everything. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying the more we add more of these requirements, so I guess I'm sort of agreeing with Ken. It's an unstable equilibrium. And how do you manage all this and still keep a fighting force that's going to do its job? I'm sure glad I don't have that job. My job is to write patents for inventors. That is such an easier job than trying to manage all these issues. Oh my goodness. I just can't even conceptualize it. So we didn't get into those issues in our briefs because they weren't relevant to the issue that was being considered. But since my friend Ken raises it, my goodness.
All right. Dean Hedges has a question. Do you think women in the military would have a good effect on diplomatic solutions, that war would be less likely?
Well, that's interesting. You have to remember it's a subset of women who are able to be soldiers in the first place that you're talking about, not women in general. But I've never done military service, obviously, myself. Nobody in my immediate family has. I certainly know a lot of people who have done. I always thank them for their service so in such a heartfelt way. I think Ken did, actually, Ken Jolivet. But I don't think it's impossible. No, I mean, I'm envisioning the female soldiers that I have known, and of course they're tough and everything. But I think maybe just the way it plays out with the psychology, maybe there's more openness to finding solutions. I wouldn't say just a flat no to it. I mean, it certainly seems possible to me. And I guess that's what some of the women's movement argues too. And it's not impossible that they're right about that, or that there's something to that. I just don't know how you set that off against all the other considerations. There's so many issues that we've been talking about, but yeah. I mean, everybody's got their own skill set, and those skill sets, we all get up in the morning with our complete skill sets. And even if we're out there as a soldier, we've got our histories and we've got our sensitivities and our knowledge bases, each of us.
All right, so let's see some more questions here, and thank you guys for like even the heated questions. They're pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. This is actually the most exciting
I've had all, which is great.
Yeah. All right. So Mike Buchanan basically is asking whether he agrees with the following statement: no woman.
Whether I agree.
What? I'm sorry.
Whether I agree.
Whether he agrees with the following statement that he is making. No woman in the UK military has ever passed the physical requirements for tough frontline requirements. These tests are lowered so they can pass them, so men will have to carry more equipment many miles to compensate. The Ruskies and the Chinese are laughing at the Western armies. The West will not risk lives over Ukraine or Tehran. Let's be honest about that.
I mean, I don't know about the UK military. I believe Mike, if that's what he's saying. Well, yeah, I mean, I really don't like this thing about lowering standards, and whatever that should not be happening. And the women that are in the military must be required to meet the same requirements that the men do. I mean, obviously, right? I mean, you're out there fighting the enemy, and the enemy isn't going to be like, okay, well, I'll wait an extra 10 seconds before I shell you because you're female. I mean, obviously. So there's no room for that. And I'm not a military expert. I don't know for a fact if that's happening on a daily basis in the U.S. military. Maybe Ken or other veterans know, but I agree with Mike. I mean, that absolutely should not be happening, and that cannot be happening. And look, our fate hangs on that, and it's not even necessarily our fate. I mean, it's potentially everybody in the world's fate. So, and I'm not saying the U.S. is the savior of the world, but I mean, there's the ripple effect that can happen. So, yeah, I totally agree with Mike on that. Yeah.
Grant Wilson asks, well, first it starts off with other militaries are 33% for females frontline fighting. Israel, female tank crews, hundreds of countries have female fighter pilots.
Right.
Whole Israel tank school is run by female officers and instructors. The Russians had whole bomber regiments and female infantry. If you put 50% military female, there'll be less cases of complaints, won't there be?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, So so the question is imagining a military unit that's 50% male and 50% female, and complaints from the public would be less than, and complaints of what? I'm not sure. Do you understand the question, Vernon?
Sorry, I'm going through the answered questions and kind of reread the question here. So I'm not terribly familiar with all those statistics right there, but I think the question is just asking that there's if the military is female, I think that's going to affect the kind of complaints in terms of statistics. I think I might be wrong in interpreting it that way, but
complaints about the military not. I mean, it's sort of like the complaints you get about there aren't 50% female professors and things like that.
I suppose. Grant, feel free to rephrase that question if you'd like. Yeah. All right, so Philip Tanser has another follow-up question. The case of the draft is very clear-cut discrimination, as you have stated yourself. That's why your case made sense, and I assume you think it should have been picked up. Do you still believe in the system, and how do you keep your positivity up? I think your dedication is inspirational. I can't wait for your future fights.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and believe me, I was cracking up at being involved in a U.S. Supreme Court case. What an unexpected chain of events, which, very sadly, and I won't get too sidetracked here, but very sadly came about only because of the tragic assassination of Mark Angelucci last year, our fearless civil rights warrior, NCFM's vice president, who did ever so much to advance men's rights. My dear friend, and rest in peace. That was the only reason why he wasn't doing it. And of course, his death came as a direct result of his activity in this case. His assassin was a lawyer who had terminal cancer and wanted to work with Mark. I knew the guy, and Mark was like, heck no. I mean, it actually used a little more colorful language than that. Mark was a smart guy, and he knew this guy was trouble, and he said no, and no in no uncertain terms that only Mark could use. And tragically it ended up that way. So so back to the try to revert back to, can you remind me the question? I got lost in talking about Mark. What was the question again?
Philip's question, you mean?
I'm sorry?
Philip's question?
Well, I was starting to answer the last question and got
yeah, sure. Yeah, that was Philip's question. Do you still believe in the system, and how do you keep your positivity?
All right. Well, that's a funny question. I mean, for many years, I went to law school when I was 28. So until I was 28, I was involved in a lot of different forms of activism, and I never thought of myself as a lawyer. I never thought of myself as part of the system. I thought of myself as sort of outside the system, and sort of kept that perspective to some extent, which may sound odd, but just being the person I am, I kept that perspective to some extent, even going through law school and even afterwards. And I joke about the wonderful world of law, and which of course I don't think is wonderful, but at least not in all respects. And my usual advice to people who ask me for legal advice is avoid the law, settle with this person, speak in a friendly way to them. Do not go to court. Court is bad. And, honestly, like, it's not so much that I believe in the system per se. It's more that we have what we have to work with. And my role in the movement really is based on being a lawyer and being an activist, to educate people about genital cutting, which we haven't even talked about. And more generally, I'm the public relations director for the National Coalition for Men. And so if I try to position myself as someone outside the system who doesn't believe in the system, it's sort of a non sequitur. It's like, well, Stephen, why are you here? Like, so it's not that I have this huge belief. And then let me say on the other side, I sort of still do. When I went to law school, I had this naive belief that, okay, the legal system, and I never thought it was perfect, but I thought, okay, there's principles of constitutionality. We have this document that was created in the 18th century that protects us and gives us rights that most other countries don't have, and we can go to court. And it's true, you can go to court if you have wheelbarrows of $1,000 bills. You can go to court and file these cases, or if you find some pro bono lawyer, like if your case happens to attract the ACLU Women's Rights Project, for example. Most cases you don't get your free lawyer. So I may not be quite as much of a believer in the system as I may seem like, but I'm sort of working from the platforms that are available. Or I could just say, okay, we're all lost and everything's a tragedy. But I'm an optimist. I haven't lost that yet. Hope not to. And I hope that sort of unformulated answer answers the question.
Well, I hope it does too. So we're coming close to like maybe 10 more minutes, I suppose, maybe less of the Q&A. So keep those questions coming, and be sure that they are questions. I noticed some people putting statements and opinions in the Q&A. Stephen will not be able to see those. So, and there's another one, a good question from Ken Jolovic. Love your spirit and attitude, Stephen. What's the next move on this case?
Oh, well, there's no next move on this case. I mean, this case is over. I think the next move, to an extent, there's the next move. I mean, I probably won't be personally doing it, but I'm sure there's plenty of work that can be done on trying to get the legislative initiative through to make sure that men and women are treated equally in terms of military draft registration. And it may be more important than it might seem at first. And look, I mean, it's been a long road. I mean, I became NCFM board member in 1996. I became board member in 1996. I'm the longest standing board member, which I'm proud of. But the other side of it is I'm entering into year 26 here, folks. This is solidly the second quarter century I've been an officer with NCFM. And we made a bunch of progress. Mark Angelucci made a bunch of progress, a huge amount of progress. Harry Crouch is an amazing warrior. He's our president. I don't know how the guy does it, but he's just got an amazing knack. Others contribute for sure. Greg Joseph Chuck, there's a bunch of people working hard. It would have been nice if progress had been a little faster. And of course, there's many others working for genuine gender equality. People all here at this conference and speaking at this conference, and there's several others associated with NCFM speaking as well. It's been a long road, and I feel like things are sort of getting better and getting worse. I feel like the young people, again, they're not now members. They're not buying into this old paradigm. Come on. This is old. This was appropriate in the 1950s. So they're not buying into that. So that's good. At the same time, we don't have 100,000 people coming to ICMI, do we? Or even 10,000. We don't have that. 10,000 would not be a large number, but we do not have 10,000 people coming to ICMI. At least I don't think we do. And it sort of carries over to other parts of the movement, and people don't even know that there are areas where men are discriminated against. If you talk about gender equality in the streets, people think it's all about women. Well, guess what, folks? Women being equal to men means men being equal to women. And men are not equal to women. Family court, health, you know all the issues, genital cutting, fatherlessness, sexual abuse, conscription that we were working on. The issues are all there in front of me. In fact, if I look at that, I'll look at my screen, there's 25 of them. Media bias. I get so tired of it. And I get so tired of new people to the movement. And it's great to have new energy. It's great to have, 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds with stars in their eyes. I remember there was somebody in NCFM who was 21 or something, and I was 55 at the time. We were talking about punk rock, which is great. We were able to connect on that. It's great to have these young people, but it's also depressing because, oh my goodness, all these years and they come in and they just don't understand why we haven't made more progress. And I don't understand either. I feel like we're arguing for something that's so basic, folks. It's not rocket science. Duh. Men have to register for the military draft. Women don't. Okay, well, then the military just corrects it in 1 second. Sorry, we made a mistake. Clerical mistake. Of course, we want men to be equal to women, just like women are equal to men. Of course, that's obvious. Done. Next issue. Oh, there's no men's domestic violence shelters when the Department of Justice says 38% of violence happens to men. We got to fix that. Obviously, instantly 38% of shelters in the country are for men. I mean, that's the way I look at things, but it's not happening. We all know that. So yeah, it's frustrating. Excuse my.
That's all right. Yeah. Well, I think that's probably like a good place to close it off right now. I think everybody loves your passion. I know Mr. 0303 does loves your passion.
Thank you. Well, let me say one thing.
Yeah.
I did that video and I was watching it myself and I was like, oh my goodness, I was actually really animated in this. Wow. Like 25 years, I'm not tired yet. And believe me, there are dark moments. It is depressing and sometimes really challenging. And of course, we all know about some of those moments, but yeah, we got a lot of progress to make and we need to keep rocking. And I'm so glad ICMI is here to get us together and help us on our path.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me here, Stephen. I know everybody's, been energized by this particular live Q&A, to be sure. This is a big highlight, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Take care. All right.
Take care.
All right.